Hello and welcome to Civil Society Speaks, the podcast by social platform dedicated to amplifying the voices of civil society organizations from all over Europe. My name is Andrea Abril, and today we have two special guests. Voicu, the president of the European Youth Forum, is the largest platform of youth organizations in Europe. It ensures young voices are included in decision-making process and represents the interests of millions of European youngsters through its more than 100 member organizations, one of which is Young European Federalists, JEF, the youth NGO that with more than 10,000 activists advocates for the creation of a democratic European Federation. And representing JEF, we have its president, Christelle Savall. Welcome both, guys.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Hi, good to be here.
Okay, great. So let's start with Rareş. A few weeks ago, the European elections took place, and we finally know the names of those who will be sitting in the European Parliament for the next 5 years. And once again, young people are underrepresented. What impact do you think this underrepresentation of young people in decision making has on policies that affect them?
This is a great question, and it's part of what the work that we've done at the European Youth Forum before the European Parliament elections, because we've advocated quite a bit for political parties to include more young people on the electoral lists, and not only to have them on the list, but to have them in electable positions as well on these lists. So on this topic, we know that you do not necessarily have to be young to advocate for issues that matter to young people, and we've seen quite a few cases of older politicians that stand up for youth rights and that stand up for the topics that matter to young people, including in the last European Parliament mandate as well. So we can't say that it's only young people or younger politicians that are interested in the issues that concern young people. But it's not right that young people are underrepresented in political power structures and in decision making as a consequence of that. I think in the from the data that we had most recently at the closure of the 2019-2024 mandate of the European Parliament, only two of its members were under 30 years old, as opposed to 25% of Europeans being young people. So this is a topic that needs to be addressed, and we've addressed it in the run up to the European Parliament elections to ensure that young people are in positions of power, because not only do they understand better the issues that young people face, so a very significant part of the population faces, but they also represent again a significant part of the population. So from taxation to social services to healthcare, young people have experienced, and they've experienced directly so many areas that European policies have an impact on. So it's only natural that the views of young people are included meaningfully, not only through consultations and not only by having young people at the table as an advisory opinion, but also with young people in positions of political power.
Great, thank you, Rareş. And what would you say that are the main challenges right now facing young people? How are civil society organizations like, for example, the European Youth Forum, helping to address these problems?
Well, I would say that the main issue that faces young people today is that we're not dealing with singular how should I say this, singular lone standing issues or individual issues. So oftentimes the issues that affect young people as a particular demographic group, they overlap and they intersect. So we've seen many of those issues, such as unemployment, for example, plague successive generations of citizens, and they're oftentimes left untackled by policymakers. And here we can maybe reflect on the previous topic as well, on why it is that oftentimes political bodies or politicians ignore those issues, and we can talk about underrepresentation again. So as a reason why these topics don't make it to the political agendas of parliaments and decision-making bodies in general. But apart from unemployment, we also see multiple generation-specific issues for example, for Gen Z and young people, the young people of today. I would say for us at the European Youth Forum, what we've seen when it comes to, to the social economic inclusion of young people, which is a topic that we work a lot on the topic of unpaid internships in particular, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of young people that undertake an unpaid internship. And we know this, there's data on this. So our main concern about this topic is that it's in the past few years, in the past few decades, unpaid internships have become normalized as a rite of passage. So after you graduate university, you're almost expected to be willing to do unpaid work in order to gain experience and to be qualified later on to join the labor market as a paid employee. So not only are we speaking about unemployment, but we're also speaking about these types of precarious work conditions. So we're speaking about unpaid work, and then also, if you were to look at the broader living context that young people are find themselves in today in Europe, we also see a huge housing crisis that impacts young Europeans, whether they live in, yeah, regardless of the part of Europe that they live in. And we're speaking about housing scarcity. We're speaking about incredibly high renting prices, so rent costs, and we see that this prohibits young people from being able to afford to live independently oftentimes, and in some cases it even leads to youth homelessness, which is a phenomenon that was not so present in the past few years, but we're seeing its increase more and more as the cost of living crisis deepens and the housing crisis affects more young people. So I think apart from those very social inclusion related issues that affect young people and the very core of what it means to live, so to be able to access housing, to have a well-paid job, to have access to education, we also see this more democratic aspect of it. So again, coming back to the underrepresentation of young people, we see that not only are young people underrepresented in positions of political power, but young people in general, whether or not they want to get involved in politics, they struggle to be taken seriously when it comes to being involved in decision making processes. So we see all these issues that are multifold, and I think we could speak for this about this for days, but I would say unemployment and precarious work conditions, the housing crisis, and a multiple impediments in the way to access democratic processes are some of the main challenges that are facing young people in Europe, that young people in Europe are facing today.
So thank you. You make very good points that we are going to see in depth later. But Christelle from JEF, you has been working in some different projects that focus on making the priorities of European heard, and one of which is EurHope. Could you tell us a bit more about these projects?
Yes, of course. So basically, we started with how do you feel about the future? So when you ask Europeans, young or not so young, they say anger, frustration, fear. And as a young person, I feel this for all the reasons Rareş just mentioned, the climate crisis being top of it. We had COVID, we're like, it's endless, inflation. But there's one that shines through, and the positive one is hope. So together with Make.org, JEF started this big coalition to bring back hope in Europe, EurHope. So the first phase of the campaign was to do this massive consultation online. So we got 5,000 proposals from all over Europe, all over the EU, and 1.5 million votes from young people on those proposals. The question was, what do you want for the Europe to tackle the challenge of tomorrow? So it was very broad, no restriction, no guidance, let's say, and that created the agenda of hope. So it's 15 proposals that young people agree are priorities. It's consensual, more than 65% of votes in favor. And you see here that climate crisis features a lot because 5 of the 15 proposals are about climate. You see that quality of life is there, so health, education, employment, And you also see democracy being mentioned, and the top category of ideas, whether consensual or not, were about institutions. And that's very interesting because young people are not known, or at least renowned for being interested in institution, but that's a misconception because young people understand that institution is how you make things happen. So I would say it's also one of the big takeaways of this campaign. And also that young people want change, they want reforms, and you can see this in the results that of the election, that people want change. And the 15 proposals, they are about the EU reforming itself. So with civil society, we did one page on each of the 15 proposals to say, okay, so young people, they want, a more coordinated health union. Okay, so how do we make this happen? Well, the European Union doesn't have competence in health, so you need a reform of the treaties of the European Union. So it's a broad, massive change that young people want, even if it's a bit technical sometimes. But there's a lot of need for EU reforms, and what EurHope says is that that's what the change young people want.
Amazing. Yeah, and you both mentioned youth unemployment. It remains a very significant issue in many European countries, as we see. What do you believe, Rareş, are the root causes of youth unemployment, and what strategies do you think are the most effective addressing it?
So we saw in the pandemic as well, and we know from research on the topic that young people are more exposed to economic shocks, and they're often in a moment of crisis, an economic crisis or a health crisis, again, like we had during the pandemic, they're the first ones to lose their jobs. So again, in 2020, we saw this when the youth unemployment rate rose a lot faster than the general unemployment rate. And we know that young people work oftentimes in sectors that saw some of the greatest job losses during the pandemic and in moments of crisis in general. So in the food and accommodation industry, in retail, in creative industries. So we see statistically that this is true, that youth unemployment in a moment of crisis tends to rise a lot faster than the general unemployment rate. So apart from the very core of this issue, which is that young people are more at risk to lose their jobs, when it comes to young people that are currently working, they're facing precarious work conditions and precarious work contracts as well. So we see all of these, part-time, temporary contracts, zero-hour contracts, oftentimes when it comes to platform workers, for example. And these offer very little legal stability as well, but also financial and personal stability. And they leave young people and young professionals with effects that can be long-term and quite scarring, because it hinders their career aspirations and it prohibits them from being able to have a longer-term when it comes to their career, and when it comes to their social situation and their employment status. So I think at the core of it, and the demand that we have at the European Youth Forum, is that we need to end precarity to be able to address unemployment, because it's not only that young people are unemployed, but it's also about the working conditions that they have when they do have a job and when they are in employment. But what does this involve? So reducing the precarity and ending precarity. First of all, it's really important to raise awareness on workers' rights and how to access a trade union, because these structures are in place to protect workers and to support their well-being by through organized means of negotiation and so on. So ensuring that all young people are aware of the rights they have as workers, ending all of these, bogus self-employment types of schemes that, again, perpetuate this phenomenon of precarity for young people and really hinder their possibility to think long term and hinder their financial stability. Ending unpaid internships. Again, this is one of our very core demands at the European Youth Forum, to ban unpaid internships across Europe. Eliminating age barriers when it comes to accessing social protection, because since young people are more likely to be the first ones to lose their jobs and to become unemployed, it's very important that social protection systems do not let young people go, or find themselves in a vulnerable situation just because they are young. So ending these barriers to these age-based barriers to access social protection. And we have actually at the European level, there is a program of the European Union called the Youth Guarantee. So this reinforced youth guarantee is one of the most significant elements of the EU's work when it comes to unemployment, to youth unemployment in particular. And it's basically a promise that every young person that is not in education, employment, or training should be given an opportunity within 4 months after that they gain that status of not being in education, employment, or training. So there's more than 9 billion euros committed to this, to the European Social Fund. So there is money for this, but the challenges that we see with the reinforced youth guarantee is that oftentimes it does not reach out to the young people that need it the most. So we see this very strong urban and rural divide where young people that come from rural areas do not have access to these public employment services, and then therefore they they have a lot less assistance when it comes to being able to find a job or being able to access social protection services. So what we're advocating for at the European Youth Forum is to leverage EU funds by adopting quality standards for the reinforced youth guarantee, to involve youth organizations in all phases of the implementation plans, because youth organizations are more often than not the ones that have direct contact with young people. They understand best what their issues are and how they can be best reached, especially when it comes to young people that are not in employment, education, or training, and the ones that are most marginalized. And last but definitely not least, that we have enough money for the reinforced youth guarantee in the EU budget under the next MFF. So it's a plethora of proposals that we're making and action paths that we are proposing at the European Youth Forum. But I would say, to sum it up, that young people face precarious conditions at work when they are employed, and they face a higher risk of becoming unemployed than the general population.
Totally. Great. And jumping to these young people from rural areas, you both started very young in youth activists. What would you say to a young person who wants to advocate for youth interests in their school or in their community or in their country, but don't know how to start? How can they get involved and make a difference?
Christelle, do you want
to? Well, joining an association, it's always a great start. No, I think it's very interesting to see what you're interested in as a young person, because there are many fights worth fighting, and you have to find your own calling, and it can be a trial and error. But there's something next to you, maybe it's at school. I mean, Rareş will probably speak about the unions, but I think there's an interest in finding something next to you that you care about and you want to change it. It doesn't have to be terrible as the status is now, but you want to improve it. I think it's really important that also activism is not necessarily something bad, things being bad, but things about you and the consequence you can have. And you can do this together with others that already exist. You can create your own group if there's nothing that already exists, but check it out first, because believe me, you do not want to do only structures. And you can do civic education. You can, learn by yourself about the processes, or you reach out to others, and also being involved in a community. Start in a small initiative. Try to find if there's a community group that is focused on your issue, on youth issues. And finally, there's also something you can do from your couch. There's also activism online. And that's also a great start for young people. There's this petition you're interested in, this topic. And you can also see that there are many, many others, beyond your city or your small community, beyond your country, and they're interested in the same thing as you. So I think that's why European activism is also very interesting. And that's how you will make lots of friends and learn a lot about the world, but also about yourself.
Great. And you, Rareş, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with Christelle. I was enthusiastically nodding as she was going on. I indeed started in my local school students union, so my school students council in high school, and what drove me then is I felt a sense of injustice when it came to my rights as a school student being systematically infringed upon. So then I just, also out of frustration, I decided to join the school students movement and kind of take matters into my own hands and fight for my rights and of course for the rights of my peers. So there's it's very important to find the cause that you believe in. I completely agree with Christelle. And if you struggle to find one, because there's, as Christelle there's said, there's so much to fight for out there, maybe find something that frustrates you the most about how our world looks like, and try to work on that, because you can never have too many people advocating for what is right. So I'd say find something that either you believe in, as your style said, or something that frustrates you because it's not going right, and then join a movement, join a cause, and yeah, make your voice heard and give your energy towards making this world a tiny bit better.
Fantastic and very inspiring, I'll say, listening to you both. Um, and to finally, as civil society leaders, what will be your main ask to European decision makers for the next mandate? I leave to whoever wants to start.
I can jump in quickly. uh, so for us at the Youth Forum, we had a manifesto right before the European Parliament elections that we put together with our membership as well, so with the member organizations of the European Youth Forum, and we talked in there about quite a few topics that we'd like to see on the agenda of the next parliament. So again, also some of the issues that we talked about today, ranging from unemployment and support for ending precarious work conditions across Europe, but also we looked towards climate change and policies and measures that would limit the impact of climate change. So I think if I were to focus on this topic, for us it would be for the next parliament not to write back on environmental policy. So to have a strong successor to the European Green Deal, um, and for us at the forum, what the philosophy that we and the approach that we're taking towards climate change is not only from a biodiversity perspective, and stopping pollution and lowering the carbon footprint, but we're also looking towards beyond growth. So this is what we're calling it's more of an economic perspective, and we're looking at shifting the focus from economic growth, so this perpetual economic growth approach that we see oftentimes across Europe, and just trying to limit austerity measures across Europe as much as possible. And we saw with the nature restoration law recently that um, before it was adopted, which I think actually happened yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, we saw the beginning of a pretty significant threat for the climate change agenda at the European level. So we heard this growing rhetoric that climate and policies that are environmentally focused are not in the interests of society, and that they should be halted or they should be reversed or they should slow down a bit. And we've seen also certain groups hijacking different protests around Europe to try to slash environmental legislation and to try to antagonize uh, people against environmental legislation and environmental policies. And we really hope that this inaccurate rhetoric that environmental policies are here to harm us or they're here to take something away from us is not continued in the next parliament, is not perpetuated by politicians especially, and that there is still space and we create spaces as civil society organizations as well, in the EU agenda to address core sustainability issues. So again, looking post economic growth and looking beyond economic growth, to address overconsumption, to address and to have a strong focus on delivering stretching regulations that address young people's employment and social rights. Because at a first glance, it might not seem that climate change and social and economic inclusion of young people are necessarily interconnected. but they definitely are, because we see that the impact of climate change dramatically changes the way in which our society looks, and that has a trickle down effect into young people's lives on a day-to-day basis. So I believe that we can have and we can build a greener society, which can in turn also address the social and age-based inequalities we oftentimes face. So we can have this twin green and social transition, and for this we definitely need a successor for the European Green Deal. So I'd say among many other things that we want to see from the next parliament, as a focused demand, it would be this successor to the European Green Deal.
Thank you, Rareş. What about JEF?
We need a united EU, we need a united Europe. So it's very important that pro-European forces forge this coalition, set the agenda for building peace, and commit to the necessary EU reforms that are needed to tackle global challenges. So it's very important that this new mandate builds hope and change, so that we follow what citizens have expressed, in the EurHope campaign, but in general, citizens want an EU that is capable of tackling the climate crisis that Rareş skillfully described right now, to build peace, to guarantee high-quality healthcare, build stability, also commitment to democracy, rule of law, protection of human rights. So for future EU representative, it's very important that they align this agenda with the priorities of the citizen towards a future enhanced EU. That goes through EU reform, that goes through a change of the treaties. It's important to put energy into enlargement, because it's also the future of the European Union. So it's very important that there's commitment to positive reforms beyond the current ones, and that the European Parliament is this bold actor it has been for many years, and continues to be so.
Clear and loud. Thank you very much, Christelle. Thank you very much, Rareş, for joining us today and sharing your insights on the situation of young people in Europe and the crucial role that plays civil society in addressing these issues. It has been an absolute pleasure. This is Civil Society Speaks, the podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of civil society organizations from all over Europe. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode.